There's a lot of misconceptions about what falls into a state-level animal cruelty crime.
Sometimes there are jurisdictional confusion about whose case it really is and who can actually take this case on and prosecute it most effectively.
In my mind, it is just imperative that law enforcement officers just broaden their horizon and learn just animal crimes or violations or things that are and aren't allowed, just because they're the first ones to respond in a lot of calls.
But I think it's imperative on law enforcement to become familiar with their local ordinances because they are a great resource. And I think a lot of times post-certified officers don't think that they can write citations, but they absolutely can. They're charged with enforcing the laws, which includes local laws.
My name is Lisa Milot, and I'm the Annie and Zach Stanton Distinguished Professor of Canine Welfare Law at the University of Georgia. My students and I work with jurisdictions around the state on animal control practices, on shelter programs, and on local ordinances to improve compliance and help animal welfare. When we started working on animal cruelty in Athens, Clarke County, we didn't really have much law enforcement support. And I didn't know why, because it seemed like these were, in some ways, easy cases. We were doing write-ups to make it all very straightforward, and we had great photographs and videos, but we just could not get traction. And over time, I learned that there were a couple of things going on. Law enforcement is really understaffed. They don't really have a lot of bandwidth to take on new cases. A second reason is that these cases can be really complex. And another reason is that law enforcement is, even if they're not understaffed, they're really overwhelmed with crimes against humans. And it can be hard to make the argument to redirect resources, because that's really what it is. In many instances, it's redirecting resources from prosecuting and investigating the crimes against humans to the ones against animals. And that is a hard ask to make of anyone, I think.
My name is Alan Barber. I am the Assistant Director for the Practicum and Animal Welfare Skills at the University of Georgia School of Law. I'm also a reserve officer with the Athens Clarke County Police Department. When it comes to animal cases, your average law enforcement officer, they don't necessarily know how to work it. It's not something that's necessarily taught in the academy. It's not as common as most of your other types of cases, so it's not something they're familiar with and that they're comfortable with, which is why they kind of get gun shy a little bit when it comes to these animal cases. They don't necessarily know what they can and can't do and what they should be doing. Working with live evidence is a little nerve-wracking.
My name is Juan de Leon. I currently serve as the road supervisor for Athens Clarke County. I field any questions the officers may have when dealing with animals or people in the public. Unfortunately, most police officers or law enforcement officers don't know what they're looking at when they respond, and there's animal cruelty or animal just violations there. And it stems from a basic lack of knowledge. For the most part, they're not taught that in the police department in their training. They're taught a whole wide array of things, but most counties that have animal control just prefer to have animal control investigate. They have so many other things on their plate. They don't know a lot of times what they're looking at, whether or not it constitutes animal cruelty or just animal charges at all. So they end up not responding to it, not treating it with the gravity that it should be treated with. A lot of times law enforcement officers are the first one out to just a multitude of different calls. They need to know what they're looking at, or if it should become an animal control case, like should they call an ACO out.
You're talking about potentially dozens or hundreds of animals involved, each of which has to have biological evidence collected, and where the scene has to have all of the evidence collected. And that can be really daunting. They don't have the finances even to collect all of the biological evidence that they need. The cost of collecting it in an animal case can be higher than in a human case.
The legal system runs on limited time and resources, with every court managing hundreds of active cases at once. When faced with serious crimes, violent offenses, or high-stakes civil disputes, animal welfare cases are often deferred. They occupy a gray area, too complex for a quick resolution, yet too low in priority to move quickly. The result is a system that unintentionally prolongs suffering while waiting for justice to catch up.
My name is Jessica Rock. I am the Georgia State Animal Crimes Resource Prosecutor at the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. And I am also a federal prosecutor who handles animal crimes in the Southern District of Georgia. There has been a shortage of law enforcement officers, people wanting to be law enforcement officers in recent years. And I think that's hurting us in a lot of ways, not just when it comes to animal crimes.
My name is Sherry Hines. I'm a Deputy Chief Attorney for the Unified Government of Athens, Clarke County. I represent our Animal Services Department, and I prosecute ordinance violations related to animals. Just being honest, it's a really challenging time to be a government employee. I think there's a lot of distrust, and maybe some of that is earned. But I think just nationally, there is a push for a lot of people to leave law enforcement or to not seek those jobs. I think that's unfortunate because we do need good law enforcement officers. We need good code enforcement officers. We need good animal services officers to be out there to do this work. And until we address sort of the understaffing challenges, it will be hard for people to continue to do that work. What we have seen here is at times with low staffing, what that functionally and practically means is that our animal services officers can only respond to the most serious cases, the bite cases. They can't deal with a lot of the quality of life cases that we might like to try to address before they become more significant.
Police officers, law enforcement officers handle animal crimes, whereas in the past, there was a number of animal cruelty units around the state that had post-certified law enforcement officers that's all they did. Where we see a little bit of a disconnect is an animal control officer wanting a law enforcement officer to get involved in the case or take over the case and be the lead investigator because they're interested in state-level crimes, and then there's a disconnect between that law enforcement officer understanding what is meant by that.
There can really be a lack of coordination between the various agencies that work on animal crimes. You've got law enforcement, you've got animal control, and you've actually got the Georgia Department of Agriculture. And a lot of times they don't understand what to do in those overlaps or even when the Georgia Department of Agriculture should be involved. A lot of times the various parties don't know each other very well and don't know the capacities as well as the respective jurisdictions that they each have or the tools that they each bring to the table.
What I think is really important is understanding which direction we're going to go in an animal cruelty case. The interesting thing about a certain set of facts when it comes to animal crimes, unlike maybe some other types of crimes, is that it may be a violation of our county or city ordinance. That same set of facts could also fall under our state law, and depending on how egregious it is, could potentially even fall under federal law. Whenever we have a potential crime sitting in front of us that involves an animal, the most important thing is to decide who is going to handle this investigation. Is it a case we want, for example, in the dogfighting sense, is it a case we want to make a federal case, or do we want to keep it a state case? Is it an ordinance violation and we want to keep it within our municipal or magistrate courts? Or is it something that we want to take out a warrant for that rises to the state level? So that's why it's so important to understand, even though we may have a certain set of facts that may fall under an ordinance violation, that's not necessarily where we want to proceed with the charges and ultimately the prosecution.
The role of the ACO is, if they're the first one out, they're gathering all information. They're starting their conversation with the owner. They're collecting the animal. So if it needs medical treatment or if it needs to be impounded because they are now a case animal, ideally they would call out the law enforcement officer at the same time so they can witness everything and write their own detailed report.
Animal control can help by actually taking possession of the animals and helping identify where there really are deficits in care. They're the animal experts. The Georgia Department of Agriculture oversees animal businesses. The business owners have to comply with both the Georgia Department of Agriculture laws and the local animal control laws, but animal control officers frequently don't really understand how those things work together. And law enforcement sometimes thinks that they don't really have the jurisdiction if they're talking about an animal case. The Georgia Department of Agriculture is responsible for figuring out if there are state-level violations with respect to the business laws. Georgia Department of Agriculture can also very easily get inspection warrants to the extent they're needed, so they can help get the other parties on the property to the extent there's a concern.
In some cases where the GDA is involved, the animal control officer again acts as just kind of doing the grunt work, getting all the information together and then calling in the GDA. And at that point, they are the ones letting the owner know. They're either issuing stop orders, they are telling them what they can and can't do if they're acting as a breeder or any type of cruelty with like horses or livestock in general.
It's important for law enforcement officers to understand that they are there as a resource, There's only so many of them, so they're not going to be able to handle all of the crimes in the state. It's definitely a huge step in the right direction for us to have revamped that statewide division for these types of cases.
The moment the animal's been impounded and their report's been done by the ACO, the law enforcement officer kind of takes over. Most ACOs are not post-certified, so they can't make that arrest. We rely on the law enforcement officers to do that.
Law enforcement is going to be able to get the search warrants or the arrest warrants that are needed to really start a higher level case.
They may not even be responding for an animal-related call.
The three can work together. They have very different skills and resources. And just figuring out how they work together, though, is the biggest part of it all.
Legislatures are a huge resource in the sense that they're the ones that create the laws that our post-certified officers can go enforce.
It's not their job to police animal crimes, but it's definitely their job to pass legislation that assist the law enforcement arms with being able to adequately investigate these types of cases. And I will say Georgia we have a good animal cruelty statute. However, there's other certain types of legislation where we need to be improving our laws in the state of Georgia, and that's where legislators can help. The legislators can help us by making sure that when there is a bill that involves an animal in front of them, we all work together to be sure that that law is going to be applied effectively for the health and well-being, not just of the animals, but the members of the community who are connected to those animals as well.
I think it's really important for animal advocates to work with their legislatures, whether that's the state General Assembly working on state laws, or whether that's their local legislatures, like their governing authorities, their councils, their commissions, to make sure that when we're crafting laws related to animals, that they make sense.
As we're trying to push animal welfare forward, they're the ones that can help us actually get some either more severe laws in place or backing off or more clarification when it comes to laws and ordinances, and put things in a better perspective and put things in a better position to be able to better prosecute these types of crimes. Effective ordinances in general are clear when it comes to what the violation is.
It is incredibly important that our laws are written in a clear way so that the consequences intended by the legislature are actually what play out. We work together with the Paws Clinic and with our staff and our elected officials to do an overhaul of our ordinances here in Athens Clarke County. I think they're a really great base for anybody who is thinking about ordinances that they might want to adapt.
I think about ordinances a lot more than state laws just because they're a lot more plausible to get passed. So I think there are three big ordinances I wish were more broadly enacted. One of them would be a transient sales prohibition that prohibits the sale of puppies, kittens, domestic rabbits in places like parking lots. Another one would be the requirement that animals that are being reclaimed from a shelter a second time be spayed or neutered, and offer free spays and neuters on the first reclaim. I really like the ordinance because it provides incentive for people to spay or neuter, and it's really narrowly targeted at the people who are really causing the overproduction problems. And then a third ordinance would be an anti-tethering ordinance. Anti-tethering ordinances really increase public safety dramatically.
There are a lot of different potential partners to collaborate with that can make a huge difference. And I would say one of our biggest here is Athens Pets.
Athens Pets is a volunteer group that does so much for animal control, but also all of Athens Clarke County. They allow me to offer a free spay and neuter, rabies, microchip, all the basic vaccines for free. It helps me offer something and then establish a better relationship with the members of Athens Clarke County, but also help the animals out at the same time.
You may have different nonprofits in your jurisdiction, but that has been crucial for Athens Clarke County because it's challenging to seize an animal but then not have a place for that animal to go. You don't have the resources to care for that animal. You don't have fosters to help rehabilitate that animal. Working with a good local nonprofit partner, particularly one who can help you raise funds to cover costs of veterinary care or necropsies or boarding or whatever other kind of services you need, that can be a huge third partner that I think is often overlooked.
My program, the Practicum in Animal Welfare Skills at University of Georgia School of Law, will do what we call team building workshops, where we come and we get prosecutors and law enforcement and animal control, code enforcement, all the people who are related to animal welfare and enforcement of laws concerning animals. They all meet each other and can learn from each other about their roles, ask who the Georgia Department of Agriculture inspector is, and get in contact with them, because the GDA inspectors frequently know about the trainings going on, and they have contacts with all the various people throughout the state who are very interested in helping law enforcement do their jobs.
There's plenty of in-person trainings, but there's also a host of online trainings, webinars, things of that nature that you can find both in Georgia and on the national level. It's super important for law enforcement officers and animal control officers not only to get training together on these issues, but also communicate and coordinate when it comes to deciding which type of charges we're going to go forward on in these types of cases.
In my mind, is a mixture of both state and local ordinances. What I like to fall back on is having your domestic animals rabies vaccinated and having the tag on. It allows me to start having a conversation with the owner and then addressing all the other violations I might see. Letting people know that yes, the animal has to be rabies vaccinated, it has to have the tag on, lets me put my foot in the door. Again, start that conversation, see if it's something where maybe they just need resources. They do love the animal, and maybe I can help them out? Or is it a lack of understanding? Maybe education is the route. Or is it just pure negligence? And that's when I need to bring in a law enforcement officer or cite on my own behalf.
Knowing these laws is incredibly helpful for investigations generally, because again, it does give you that opportunity to sort of open the door with a conversation of, hey, we've had some complaints here, and I also see that your dog is tethered. Were you aware that that's unlawful here in Athens County? Can we have a conversation about that? People think of what an owner is, as in the person who adopted the animal or bought the animal, is not necessarily what a legal owner is under your ordinances. So that's a really important thing to clarify. And I will say ours is very broad. People who basically take care of an animal, babysit an animal, but execute responsibility over the animal can be considered legal owners. And that's important, because otherwise you get into a whole lot of disputes of, oh, well, I'm the one who let the dog out, but really it's my boyfriend's dog. We need to be able to prosecute someone to make sure the dog stays in the house and isn't running in traffic. You want to make sure you don't have to prove who specifically did the action. When we have our ordinances written, most of them say to allow an animal to, for instance, be tethered or to run at large. I, as a prosecutor, don't particularly want to be in the position of having to say, you were the person who tethered the dog at this specific hour. But if I could prove that you knew that the dog had been tethered, maybe you told your mother to go out and tether the dog, and you allowed the dog to be tethered, that makes it much easier for me to prosecute my cases. And so trying to think about how to craft your ordinances to limit what your prosecutor does or does not have to prove can be very helpful.
I think it's effective when communities know who to contact, how to contact them when it comes to these types of cases.
When it comes together right, it's like a well-oiled machine. Law enforcement recognizing what they have, getting animal services involved as quickly as possible, getting the local prosecutors involved and aware of the situation as quickly as possible.
The best way that I've interacted with the GDA investigated crime, it was actually a horse call not too far from the shelter. The call was placed initially with them, and they called me out. There were a lot of other animals there that was out of their wheelhouse, and they knew that they could contact me. Working together, we were able to establish who is the owner of all of the animals, which animals, who needed to be charged for what crime, making sure that all the animals were properly cared for. I have the whole shelter, and so I'm able to offer a little bit more help in maintaining the animals, as well as letting them document everything that they need in order to push any paperwork that they may have and push any stop orders or just put an end to just whatever call or the initial call was.
Another case that we worked in Cherokee County, for example, it was another dogfighting case. There was multiple law enforcement agencies that were involved in that particular case. The Cherokee County Marshal's Office was involved, the DA's office, the Sheriff's Office, the animal control officers, I believe maybe even code enforcement officers. So it was intergovernmental collaboration within that county that led to a successful investigation and prosecution of that case. And I would say pretty much any time we have these large-scale cases where there's a lot of animals being seized, whether it's a dogfighting case or it's a puppy mill case, it's all hands on deck within a community to make sure that everything is done successfully. It's my job to be the statewide resource for investigations and prosecutions of animal crimes. I spend a good bit of time just simply answering phone calls, answering emails, helping them with language for search warrants, language for arrest warrants, but also to do training and to set up trainings, get those individuals in that county all in the same room. The veterinarians, the prosecutors, the law enforcement officers, the animal control officers, anybody who might be involved in investigating and prosecuting these crimes, and make sure that they all know who each other are so that they can effectively communicate and build these cases in the proper way.
There were very serious cases with dogs that either died or were near death that just weren't being prosecuted because people didn't know how, and they didn't have the resources and the connections with law enforcement to make those cases. Now, I feel comfortable that when we get a report of animal cruelty or a serious ordinance violation, those cases are going to be prosecuted appropriately, and I'm very thankful to be able to say that. So I want us to continue those gains and to certainly help other people in the region make those gains, because the more we can all work together to resolve these problems, the better off we'll all be.